Welcome back. Now we have some awesome macros that we can use to make our life easier to draw these debug shapes. But notice that we define these in slash.h. Now this is an overall header file for our game project. And if we just add all of the macros and things that we want in slash, then whenever we include slash in some other class, we'll get everything in slash. Now it's good to keep things modular. In essence, it would be nice to have our own header file just for our debug macros. And that way, if we need debug macro functionality, we can just include that header instead of including slash.h. Well, we can actually create our own custom header files right here in Visual Studio. All we need to do is right-click on slash here and go to Add and select New Item. And when we do this, we can choose to create a header file, a .h. Now, we can name our header, and I'm going to call this Debug Macros. And now we'll have a Debug Macros header that we can just include anywhere where we'd like to use our debug macros. Now, by default, it's going to try to stick this header file in intermediate/project files. And intermediate is automatically generated and is constantly overwritten every time we compile. So the first time we actually compile our code, this header will be gone. We need to make sure to place it in a persistent file that won't go away. We want it in our source file. So we can click Browse and come out a couple of levels until we see our source file here in our /project file. I'm going to double click source, and inside source we have slash. Our header should go in that folder. So I'm in source slash, I'm going to stick it here. So click select folder, and we'll see here that it's going in /source/. That's where we have our private and public folders. We're just going to stick our header file right there next to those folders. So we can click Add. And now we have a debug macros.h, and we can place our macros here. So in /.h, what I'd like to do is simply cut these out. So Control X to cut them, and I have them copied. And I'm going to go to debug macros.h and Control V to paste them here. And now they're defined here in debug macros. Now in item.cpp, we're including draw debug helpers where these functions are defined, but we could now just cut that out and include it in debug macros.h right here. Now, depending on the engine version, you may not even need to include debug helpers. It might be included by default, so you can get away with not having this here. But just to be safe, we'll include it anyway. And then we're covered for any engine version that may not have debug helpers included by default. So now we have debug macros.h, and anywhere we wish to use these macros, we can include that instead. So here, instead of including slash, I'm going to include our new header file, and that exists in /debugmacros.h. And now that we're including this, we can use these macros without getting compilation errors. And I'm noticing that I defined the macro symbol 30 here. That was for educational purposes, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And now that our macros are defined in their own header file, we can compile and use this. Now I'm going to exit out of the editor because this is a change that hot reloading may not detect. So I'm going to go ahead and Control-Shift-B to build my whole solution. And now I can launch the editor. And now I can press play and see that I still have the same functionality. So everything is working perfectly. Excellent. Now we see our brand new header file called debugmacros.h right here next to the private and public folders. And we can include this anywhere we would like to use those debug macros. And then we don't have to include /.h. Our debug macros are in a header file more specified for strictly containing debug shape drawing functionality. So now we know how to draw some debug shapes, spheres, lines, points, and we have a custom draw vector macro that draws a line and a point, and this is great. And Draw Debug Helpers has other debug shapes that you can draw as well, such as circles and boxes and capsules. Now, we're not going to go through all of them at this point, as this would get a little bit redundant. For now, we have the tools that we'll need, and if we need to draw other types of shapes, then we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So great job. We now have some debug capabilities. We can log to the output and draw messages to the screen, as well as draw shapes in the world, and this will help us greatly as we're making our game. Excellent. I'll see you in the next video.